This is the Troutbitten podcast.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Yeah, Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
It's about trout.
Wild trout. This is Troutbitten. So this is the Troutbitten podcast. Thank you for tuning in. This is episode 13. We're here to talk about big trout and chasing them through two of the best states for wild trout fishing, Pennsylvania and Montana. I'm Dominic Swantowski, owner of Troutbitten and author of Troutbitten.com. So my guest today was here way back in the beginning. He saw it all. I was introduced to Matt Grobe by our mutual friend Pat Burke over a decade ago. And as much as people like to complain about social media, it's those early days of the whole thing that brought many of the original Troutbitten crew together. So Matt was part of it all. And with our friends Sloop, Sawyer, and Pat, we exchanged ideas and stories on a private online message board that we called Troutbitten. That really was the core, the seed of everything that Troutbitten would become. And you know, back then it was the same as it is now. We fished hard, tried to improve. We're always searching for the next game-changing tactic, never blamed the fish, and always believed that we could do better. We chased trout all over the state of Pennsylvania, and although it was the refinement of tactics that kept us going, it was the river that kept us out there. Every one of our friends appreciated the experience. We all longed for those moments of peace and silence, and we felt like we were part of something special out there by wading and fishing all 4 seasons, without pause, among waters large and small, just searching for the next trout. And really, not much has changed since then. So I'm going to forego the Q&A round for this episode. In this podcast, I'm changing up the format. Instead of having my full panel of friends, I wanted to just sit down with my longtime friend and see where the conversation takes us. Matt Grobe is one of the best fishermen that I know. He's honest and realistic. He values wild trout and he hates the shortcut. Matt doesn't fish setups. He earns every trout because he appreciates the experience, the fair chase for wild trout in wild places. He's a technician on the water, but he's not competitive. He's generous, but secretive in all the best ways. Matt searches for answers out there, and trout fishing has been part of his life for a long, long time. Matt's one of my favorite people that I've ever shared the water with, and I wish he still lived in Pennsylvania. So Matt, how about I quit talking about you and have you speak for yourself? How's it going, my friend?
Wow. Memory lane right there, brother. I think I smelled your special chicken. Like I could smell it through the microphone.
The chicken?
While you were talking. Yeah, just, tailgating, talking fishing.
Jeff's
eating
chicken.
Your chicken.
Grilled chicken.
Yeah.
At the tailgate.
Like so many memories just came flooding back.
One of the last times we hung out, we did the grilled chicken. Yeah.
We did the grilled chicken, and I think you might have drank a stanky beer we found in the woods during rifle season.
That's one of our rules.
Right?
Lots of people tube around here. Well, in the summer, right? And they'll bring beers. So there's just random beers sometimes in the rivers. And if you find one, you have to drink it. That's our rule, right?
That was, I puckered up, and I for a second thought, am I going to walk out of these woods with this guy? And sure enough, I was slugging the beer, and boy, friendship lasts forever. I know we haven't talked as much, ever since moving to Montana, but man, it's a pleasure to be on, and it's fantastic to see what you've done with Troutbitten, and yeah, it's been fantastic.
I mentioned social media again, there's a lot of stuff we don't like about it, but that's kind of how you and I have kept in touch even. So that's great.
Yeah. Absolutely. You love it or hate it, but I always say everybody has the power to do as much or as little as you want on social media.
Yeah, there you go. You're in control of it. Yeah.
You're in control of it. So if you don't like something, and unfollow or
exactly. You just have to have that discipline to unfollow and stop looking. If I feel negative feelings about something or something that I'm looking at, I stop looking at it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
A simple unfollow does a lot of good, and
That's
so.
True. Hey, did you fish today?
I did not fish today. I did listen to the podcast though.
Did you? Okay.
These short days in Montana, I have an hour drive to work each way from Bozeman out to the Shields Valley where I work. And the limited daylight prevents me from stopping at the many trout streams I pass on my way to work. And so Days on the water have been limited lately, but I say that, and I still, my buddies yell, I still get out for 4 hours a week, a week at the least.
Yeah.
Right. And so I feel very fortunate. I don't have to tell you about close proximity to wild trout waters and what that does for the soul.
Yeah, right on. You mentioned, it's darker earlier now. So by the time you're out of work, you have no chance to fish.
No.
Joey, my oldest son, is all mad because of daylight savings time. Of course, he's lived through it, 12 years before, but this year, in his 13th year, he's all mad about it because he was fishing almost every day he came home from school. And all of a sudden, he's like, Dad, I have no fishing time. I'm like, you have like an hour and a half of fishing time. That's not enough. He's kind of right,
You should tell him just to reference your night fishing articles on the website, right. And you can open up a whole. If I didn't have man-eating grizzly bears chasing me, I might think of that night fishing game a little more.
So that's one of the things. That's funny because that's one of the things you remember. I said, "You got a night fish out there?" You're like, "Yeah, maybe." And then once you got there, you said, "Nope."
Dude, no. I mean, so I could tell you a story like the first couple weeks of moving out here, right? And my whole situation. And for those that don't know, I'll tell you a little bit about myself real quick. Please. So I had a similar upbringing as Dom. We grew up in southwestern Pennsylvania, Latrobe, PA to be exact. Mm-hmm. And I spent, my earliest memory fly fishing is my earliest memory fishing, period. I'll never forget it. Super vivid. I was with my dad. We were at a delayed harvest in southwest PA, and I was sight fishing a green weenie. And
right on, there you go.
And saw that stock brown trout eat that fly. And, I'm sure at that time I didn't know it and my dad didn't know it, but, my life changed right then and there.
Yeah.
And I never stopped fishing from that day. And I was hooked, trout bitten, however you want to call it.
Right.
I mean, I was just.
Eventually you had a word for it.
Yeah. And I was hooked, growing up in that part of the state.
Yeah.
We rely on the stock fish
for sure,
and you write so well about the hierarchy of fish, and have, a couple podcasts ago you guys talked about it. But what there's the situation where stock fish should be and are appreciated.
Yeah, I needed them. I needed them as I was a kid too. Yeah,
we would have never been in the situation we are without the stocking program, just because of the thermal issues we have in that part of the state
and acid mine drainage.
Yep. Acid mine drainage. And so, wow. I mean, I spent the first part of my youth chasing fish, and that's kind of, how I spent most of my time until early teens. And I was fortunate to have my brother and then my sister, and they all attended Penn State, right?
Mm-hmm. There you go.
That was back before social media, right? Before social media. And, I'd get these calls from my brother, and he'd be like, man, he's like, there's fish behind every rock up here. Yeah. And I'm like, what are you talking about, man? It's like June 15th and our fish are belly up down here, or they got harvested. And, and I put the rod away and chase bass. Mm-hmm. And he would just sit there and be like, no, man, like, these limestoners are the real deal. And then that's just it took me to a whole other level going up there. And so I went to school there. I didn't go to school there for a major or a career. I went there to fish. I mean, I went there to, wake up with a rathskeller hangover and chase blue-wing olives instead of going to biology 101 or whatnot. And
I like that.
And that was just, Mecca, right? I mean, that was fantastic. It is fantastic. And it just allowed me to appreciate some world-class brown trout, wild brown trout fishing.
Class A wild trout. That's what the state calls it. And anywhere in this state where you find that designation of Class A wild trout, there really kind of is a fish behind it or in front or beside every rock. There's a fish. Rock. There's a fish looking at your presentation almost every time. Almost every time you got a trout at least seeing what you're offering. That's special.
Yeah. And, one thing led to another, and you touched on it, and, we got connected. And the early Troutbitten years, as you recall, were some of the more impactful years as far as transforming my angling technique and skills. And, we spoke 2 to 3 times a day, right?
Yeah,
and we'd be posting on the forum and bouncing ideas off everybody.
We were all digging in, man. Yep.
Digging in.
Yep.
And it was just fun. And I feel like we were at the best fishing I ever had was prior to me leaving for Montana.
Yeah.
I think it was June 2015. And that water, like, dude, when you have those limestoners hit a certain level towards the end of May and early June, and the bugs pop.
Yeah.
Man, the dry fly fishing with the slate drakes.
Okay.
I mean, it was slate drakes. It was BWOs. It was late stage sulfurs.
Yeah.
And it was just like a smorgasbord. And every fish in the river was rising. And it was just, I was like, oh my gosh, man.
Didn't you have like a week? Is this the week you're talking about? It was just
dude.
endless.
It was that week where I was sending you those pictures.
Right.
I feel like it all came together for me up there.
Yeah.
Like I was
like
getting
your send-off.
whiskeys.
Yeah.
Yep. I was getting whiskeys.
Yep.
My brothers were there. My dad was there. We were camping.
Yep.
And it just was epic. And then life throws some crazy stuff at you, and one thing led to another. And I got an opportunity to come to Montana. And I tell people are like, they just assume I came to Montana for the fishing. And as that was noted, as I was considering, it was my job that brought me out here.
Yeah.
I went from that. And I've been fortunate to fish all over the country.
Yeah.
And I tell people this all the time because they ask me, about Pennsylvania out here. And I without question say I came from the best wild trout fishing in east of the Mississippi to what I would say is the best wild trout fishing west of the Mississippi.
Right on.
And so that's not a bad thing, right?
No.
I guess I'm pretty spoiled.
No, for sure. So obviously, though, there are differences. Both are meccas, right? And I haven't traveled around nearly as much as you have, but you can say it. And, you just said, east of the Mississippi and west of the Mississippi, and now you've lived in both. What are the key differences?
So I think, for one, the fishing overall is more technical in Pennsylvania than in Montana. It's no disrespect to anybody that fishes out
That's the way
here.
it is. That's all right.
I just think it's much easier here, and I attribute that to the influx of wild rainbow trout, the wild cutthroat trout. I think you have, the streams out here have multiple wild trout species.
Yeah,
and
that's
so
a good point.
if the browns are being lethargic because of a sunny day or whatnot, well, I always have the I don't want to call the dumb rainbows, but the more eager,
they're just more eager. That's all. Yeah.
Yep. And they provide just more consistent fishing than our wild browns in central Pennsylvania.
Sure.
So I think that's one of the key differences as far as the overall fishing. And then, you have the size, the turbulence. I think you got more volume out here. The rivers are somewhat bigger. Dom, float fishing is incredibly prevalent out here out of drift boats. And there's a reason for that. I mean, the rivers are big. They're easier to access via drift boat. So that's kind of a pretty different than back in PA. Not saying you can't float in PA.
Especially central PA, though. We don't really have many. Yeah, we don't have opportunities to do that.
Right. And the state creates great access points. They make it incredibly convenient to launch a boat. And that's honestly, that's what most people that come out here do. I mean, they come out to fish out of a drift boat. And so everybody assumes, it's Montana, right? There's, you guide. There's an allure to fly fishing in Montana. I mean, we talked about it at the movie. It can be life-changing in the sense of the scenery, and it's wild out here. I mean, I tell people there's more people in Allegheny County in Pennsylvania than the entire state of Montana.
Is that a fact?
It's a fact.
No kidding. Yeah.
So it's wild still.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, seems like there's a massive increase over the last 3 years in tourism, which is true. But overall, it's this wild, state.
Yeah.
And there's that aspect to it as well. Montana has that. But long story short, the bugs, okay?
Yeah.
In my opinion, people are like, whoa. I'm like, man, I miss Pennsylvania hatches.
Really? I thought you'd say the opposite because you got big bugs.
No, we have big salmon flies, right?
Yeah.
But as far as you think I wouldn't, I used to be I would sit on the banks of some of those central PA limestoners and wait for that spinner fall at night or time the emergence, and at one point when I got into the mono rig more and nymphing and saw how productive that was, I kind of didn't do it as often as I had growing up.
Yeah.
But I find myself 7 years detached from fishing frequently in Pennsylvania, really missing the diversity, the fact that you could have full-blown spinner falls with multiple bug species in the evening, and very rarely out here. Now, I say rarely. There's some rivers that, the Missouri, for instance, that has plenty of, that's a dry fly mecca spot. Some of the spring creeks in Paradise Valley. But overall, most of these really tumbly freestoners, you don't get those pods of fish just gobbling up spinners or mayflies as frequent as we did back in Pennsylvania.
But what I am jealous of is those big salmon flies. That's special. The only time I've ever gotten to fish big bugs like that is when the cicadas were out here. And that was ridiculous.
Oh, man. I remember the stories.
Yeah,
you've told me the stories of that.
I'd love to have that on a regular basis every year,
It's not, it doesn't suck. I mean, it's absolutely fun to huck that thing, and it's pretty consistent, and to see the eats are very similar to how those cicada eats were, right? They just explode on that fly. And so, I mean, that stuff's fun. The bushy elk hair stimulators and the royal wolves. And I think last episode or the episode before, you were talking about when you camped up on the Madison and you mostly fished dry flies, right?
And Dad and I fished all dries. I mean, almost all dries, 95% of the time. I nymphed a little bit. I streamer fished a little bit, but boy, not much. They were all over the dries. It was early August.
Yeah. And to your point, that like wet wading at that time of year, not saying it's not productive back in Pennsylvania with terrestrials. It's just different out here. It's like those fish are really settling into a consistent water pattern, and they're still eager for those terrestrials like a hopper. You just get away with some bigger dry flies, and it's fun and it's good. And, like I said, both places are pretty phenomenal.
Nice. Fulling Mill is the world's leading producer of flies, fly boxes, hooks, beads, and tippet. Known for their barbless hooks, they have many of your favorite trout patterns tied barbless. Not only that, they feature patterns from anglers like George Daniel, Pat Weiss, Josh Miller, Joe Goodspeed, and many others from around the world. Every pattern is backed by the 200% Fulling Mill guarantee. If a fly isn't up to the highest standards that you expect, they will replace it with two that are. Stock up at fullingmill.com or ask for their flies at your local dealer. You've always had a knack for catching big trout. I mean, that's true. You're one of my buddies who's just, you catch the big ones. But I know that's not luck, right? So why do you focus on chasing the big ones? And then we'll talk about maybe how, but why do you focus on chasing the big ones?
Man,
is that fair to say? Do you focus on big trout?
So I've gone through stages, and you've spoken about this on the we go through fish counting stages, we go through big fish stages.
I just feel like you've always been in a big fish stage.
Yeah, I mean, so it's one of those things that early on I was more of a dry fly numbers guy, and then a couple. I moved to a spot in central or southwestern Pennsylvania that had a reputation of having big fish.
Right.
And let's face it, everything about trout fishing for me and, like-minded folks like yourself, just want to learn.
Yes.
I'm fascinated by, why is this guy catching all these big fish or making it look like he's catching a lot of big fish? Right. With the grip and grins. And so it's more of an educational thing for me. And so when I was living in southwestern Pennsylvania, there was a tailwater I fished frequently. And it gave up big fish. And I started asking myself, okay, like I caught a 25-inch brown trout. Now I'm going to say this, fingerling stocked tailwater.
Right. Understood.
Okay.
Yep.
And caught a 25-inch brown trout on a size 16 Paradine sulfur.
Yeah.
And that's because it goes against everything.
Oh, right.
That you hear.
That's not a big fly.
And that's not a big fly. That's not at night. That's not articulated.
He's not being a predator.
Right. And so I'm like, wait a minute. And then the summer, went along, and I stuck a couple 22 plus inch
Mm-hmm.
brown trout on dry flies.
Mm-hmm.
And so then that just got me immersed in this whole big fish thing. Like at that time, let's say I'm 25, 26, and I'm in it, man. And this is before Instagram got big. Like, and then some creepy dude named Pat Burke reaches out to me to try to poach some info.
So the truth comes out. Yeah.
Yeah. The truth comes out, and he invites me to, I'll never forget this. We floated a limestoner, right? We're staying away from the names here.
Right.
So
River
we floated a limestoner in central PA.
Yep.
And this is funny because he thought I could row. I'd never rowed.
Hey, Pat
before.
taught me how to row. I broke his seat. I broke his seat the first day I ever rowed. I just leaning back so hard, I just broke the seat. Anyway.
Well, yeah. And he's like, yeah, man, you want to row? And I'm like, well, okay. And I'm rowing into bushes, and you know how it can get.
Oh my God.
When you're floating those central PA streams at that flow,
it's
like
tight.
it can get tight.
Yep.
And so whatever, we started laughing, and we pulled out, and thank goodness I went. My wife was kind of worried, honestly. She's like, well, who is this guy?
Is
I'm
it?
like,
Yeah.
I mean, he seems fishy. I'm like, whatever. So, and then friendships were born, and then you guys invited me on the Troutbitten forum.
Yeah.
So I went through that phase. And then when I met Pat and then got introduced to you guys, why did I chase big fish? I mean, it was more of that wanting to learn, and then seeing Pat's consistent success in areas that I may not have been pulling out bigger fish.
Because he's also a really good big fish fisherman.
Incredible. I mean, he taught me a lot as well. And I started listening and watching his techniques. And then we'd have the forum and we'd debrief almost at the end of the night.
Right.
And so once I saw the success of the mono rig and kind of an approach to targeting big fish mentally and then tactically, it kind of just stuck with me for a long time. And I'm sure we'll talk about that those techniques and whatnot, but that's kind of what it was, man. It was like almost holding yourself inner competitive drive to go after these big fish. And I actually have a question for you on that.
Yeah.
You guys have talked about certain things on the podcast prior to this. What do you consider a big fish? I think we should specify that.
Right. It depends on where you are, where you're fishing, but 20. We call them whiskeys, right? 20s.
Yep.
20s our mark. And 18 is fantastic. And some rivers some rivers only the top tier fish or the top class of fish is at upper teens. And man, you could fish for 5 years and not catch 20.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
For us, 20 is big, and 24 is a namer. Here's Matt Grobe, the guy who started the term namer. Okay?
Right.
Tell everybody about that real quick.
Yeah, so I think that fish, and I'm not even kidding you, that fish I caught on that sulfur, I don't care what anybody says. You're not catching a ton of 2-foot fish.
Right. Nowhere.
In a year. It's just... there's some oddities out there maybe in some tailwaters and maybe some lake run influence, but we're talking specifically, big river brown trout, whether they're fingerlings or wild or whatever. Those fish are hard to catch.
Right.
And so what better thing to do than to give it a name? And so Pat was like, man, where did you catch that? On Facebook or something. And I'm like, you mean Hog Johnson?
So that was the first namer. His name was Hog Johnson.
Who's Hog Johnson?
I remember Hog. I remember that picture. You kind of had it up by your face.
Oh, yeah.
That was one of my favorite looks for a while. I was like, I'm going to try to duplicate that. It's held up real high.
I mean, super big grin. And I'm like, who Hog Johnson is, Pat? Yeah. That butter brown, or you saw that big, nasty brown trout. Yeah. And that's when we start. I'm like, you got to name your 2-footers, man. Dude, and that's why it's not a 2-footer, it's a namer.
So 2 feet is really big. And 20 inches for me is big. Now, is that different in Montana?
No. I mean, I think to your point, it depends on the stream you're fishing. Yeah. Because a 12-inch brook trout could be a monster.
Great point. Yes.
So you have to be open-minded. Yeah. I just for sake of big fish, I agree with you. A 20-inch fish is very big. And every inch after that is incredibly impactful on the length and the size on the majority of fish.
Joey asked me the other day, he caught a 20, honestly. He caught his first 20, and he asked me, oh man, he said, that might be 24 by next year. And I said, no, it'll take more than a year for it to grow 4 inches, bud, you know?
Right.
It has to, and I said, it has to not only get longer, but so much bigger, fatter, you know?
Sure. And that goes back to that first trout I caught. And then I have this inner drive to learn and chase these big fish. But I will say, I personally, like, it's exhausting in how I approached it, almost to the point where I don't want to say burning out, but I hit a point where it's like, okay, like I take it pretty serious, like probably way more serious. Probably why I have a hard time finding fishing friends. Yeah. But I take it to the point where I'm going to go to bed at 8:00. I'm going to get up at 3 a.m. I'm going to drive, I'm not going to let a 3-hour drive limit me from exploring a particular watershed that I think may produce big fish.
Nice.
And so I feel like in order to maintain that, commitment and that, desire, right, it takes a toll on you. And I wade. I mean, we could get into, out here, right? It's a little different in the access, how you access streams, where if you cross a river and the road is public, you park there and you stay below the high water mark, and you can penetrate way into these places on
if you have the energy. Yeah.
If you have the energy, and it takes a toll. Like my back hurts. I mean, I'm getting old, man. I'm going to be 40 this in January. And I beat myself up, doing this stuff. And at some point, the desire and determination to find certain areas that yield these big fish benefit me right now, because I don't have as much. I wouldn't have to explore as much if I wanted to target some of these spots, because I know they yield big fish. Yeah. Right. And so at that time, I'm like 25 to 35, that 10-year span, I really hammered it. I mean, I exhausted myself, but the reward is I have some really good spots that I can get to that I know are going to produce. But I would much rather fish a high mountain stream these days. Yeah. Dry dropper, you don't see anybody, and a 12 to 15 inch fish is just fine. So I mixed it up. I mixed it up a lot more these days than I used to. But a lot of my success, like this year, and I'll say this year, I caught more 24 inch fish this year than I did any year in my entire life.
Did you name all of them? I'm sorry. I'd
have to go back through my feed, but
Go ahead.
I did name them. And,
that is something why more this year, even though you weren't targeting, let's say, big fish as much this year?
So I have a rule of thumb, and you can appreciate this. You have 2 young kids, and I have a 17-month-old daughter.
Yep. That'll change everything.
And it changes everything.
The exploration becomes different.
It does.
Yes.
It totally
I don't
does.
explore nearly as much. And I fall back in a good way. I fall back on a lot of the knowledge that I already gained when it, like you said, 25 to 35. That was about me too.
Right.
Yeah. I fall back on that knowledge. I know this area. Give me 150 mile radius. I know where I can go.
Yeah. You're efficient. Right.
Yeah. And you have to be, right, because of the kids.
Right. And so people would be like, I'm not the type of angler that will go to that same spot over and over and over again.
Same
when
here.
you catch a big fish. I don't have the attention span for it.
Yeah, I get bored.
But what that allows us to do then is, instead of fishing that same spot that we know can yield a 20, 24 inch fish, we're out there exploring. Right. And so for 10 years, I would constantly force myself to explore the next watershed. And don't get me wrong, man. Like, there's so many times, like, you have to be okay with striking out. Like, you have to be okay with catching no fish. You have to be okay with being disappointed. And then when you're a working guy and you have that one day to fish and you're bypassing the Madison And then you're coming home with no fish. I mean, it's like, what am I doing? Right. But 1 out of 8 tries yields this great fishery. Right. And by the time you do that for 8 years, you got 8 spots. So if I have 8 days to chase big fish and I'm in the mood for it, I go right for the money. Right. I'm like, boom. And I'm right in there. And that's why I think I caught that many 2-foot fish this year, because I went straight to the goods.
Yeah. Well, you earned it,
Sure.
You put in that time and now you're sort of reaping the rewards of it. And in a time when you kind of need that knowledge. And
right.
You and I are both lucky that we've had a lot of fishing time in our life, way more than the average person. We've also made the time for it. I kind of always made sure that I had access to really high quality wild trout streams. And I know you Hey, so you really do catch more big ones than anyone else that I know, or even anybody else that I see on the web for that matter. And the trout you chase are legitimate. No setups, no club fish, no pets, not being fed from the bank, not lake runs. Not that there's any, but they're different when they're lake runs. You're almost, it's almost common to catch a trout over 20 inches, when they're lake run.
Sure.
So let's talk about that. Why does the quality of trout matter to you? Why does it matter where they came from or how they got so big?
So this is an awesome question. It takes me back to a time frame on the forum where we had some really heated discussions on wild trout versus stock trout versus fingerling trout. And for me and you, and I think we aligned in this, and I don't want to speak on your behalf, but I feel like we aligned with, we were very open-minded, and it wasn't like I was demeaning. Like, you and I grew up fishing for artificial trout. Yeah. Appreciate it and understand that it absolutely is important in certain situations. But as we grew older, I just wanted to know what I was catching. Like, what am I catching? Is there a chance that, Joe Schmo down the road was pellet feeding this trout? That's right. And it got into this section. Like, why is there a palomino in this stretch? That's a red flag for me.
That's right. It's a red flag. Bit of a giveaway.
So, and you and I we always said, okay, there's nothing wrong. I just want to know. It has nothing. It's nothing more than that. Right. I just want to know from a biological standpoint. And I find it incredibly fascinating. Is there areas in Pennsylvania, is there areas that have this secluded, area of 100% wild trout without getting stalkers to penetrate the system? And I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I just asked the question, and we know there's absolutely sections in central Pennsylvania that are all wild trout, right? And does that impact how big they get? I don't know the answer to that, right? But then you have some of these guys that are catching these massive, fish, and they seem out of place, right? So it's not knocking anybody. It's just, I question, okay, that's out of place. Did they discover something? I'm not by any stretch of the imagination saying they didn't. I personally, from my experience, just think, okay, what is that stream attached to? Yeah. Do holdovers get bigger than 100% wild trout? Right. And then I grew up, for a long time fishing the tailwaters that have fingerling, help. And those fish grow big and they're fantastic.
Oh, they're fun.
And I just always wonder if they remove that.
Yes.
What impact does it have on the size of the fish in some of those areas? Sure. I mean, so that's the Pennsylvania, piece. And so when I moved out here, there's luckily, I mean, the history of Montana. Everybody knows it's well documented. They don't stock moving water out here. And so that's pretty unique. Yes. But I will say, when you do the research, there's also some famous waters that dump into lakes. Yes. And this isn't you said it. There's nothing wrong with a 20-inch lake fish. Right. But where Matt Grobe wanted to get, I wanted to find 100% locked in freestone brown trout. Yeah. That grew to 2 feet. And so out here, you can actually look at some of these watersheds and know they're locked in. They're all free flowing into a river that's not flowing into a lake. They don't get stocked. And so unless someone's illegally putting fish in, there's a high probability that those fish are just purely what they are. And that was always unique and intriguing to me, just coming back from PA. Not saying there's, not big wild brown trout in Pennsylvania. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying from a question education standpoint, when you have an educated debate with somebody, it's neat to be able to say, well, look, I can verify.
Yeah, I mean, that's wild. There's almost no question about it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty cool and,
it is.
And pretty unique. And it's just a cool discussion. People get heated, man.
Dude, people get sensitive. People are very sensitive when you start saying, well, that might have been stocked. Or it might have been fed. It might have been, there was a club 4 miles downstream. That fish might have swam up. No, this is wild. Don't you tell me that's... Yeah, people get very sensitive. I guess I understand it. But
it's not...
like you, I've always been really open-minded. I just want to know the truth. And then, unfortunately, many times we can't know the truth. I caught a trout on one of our local streams the other day. And man, for all the world, it looks wild. But I think it was being fed from somewhere upstream that we both know about. And I'm like, nah, And honestly, hey, it was fun to catch. That's not the point. It's not whether it was fun or not. I just want to know the legitimacy of it. Well, maybe that's even a poor choice of words. I just want to know the history of it. What made it that big? Was it all natural, or was there a man-made or a setup, kind of an influence? To me and to you, that's important knowledge.
Right.
Why is it important? I think it's important in part for the learning that you said. We want to know so we can maybe repeat that experience of catching that trout. Maybe it doesn't exist in other places, but if it was set up from 4 miles downstream.
Right. And here's a question for you. So, and I guess I had a lot of time, and I say time, let's say about 10 years fishing. And Pennsylvania is very known for their fingerling program on tailwaters. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But what I found on certain numbers of them where these fish would grow really big, but they were like almost unnaturally thick.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And so have you ever seen, and I will say I haven't seen it out here where there's a high probability I know this fish I caught is 100% freestone brown trout, 22 inches. And the girth never got as girthy as the fish I was catching on that Pennsylvania tailwater that they were fingerlings.
Because those fingerlings were bred in the hatchery, genetically selected to eat aggressively and grow fast. That never grows away. People always argue, well, once they're in there for a while, they act very wild. I agree with that. For the most part, I agree with that. However, that instinct, that genetically bred instinct to feed aggressively, and then, well, not just instinct, but just their nature to grow fast and grow in that way, that's never going to change just because it's in the river.
Right. They just seem out of place. Like, why is this fish so big? Yeah, there's some incredible insect populations, obviously, up in your part where you live right now. Some of the best in the world, right? Abundant food. And I don't know if I've ever seen you fish up there as much as anyone, and so does Dell. And I don't know if I've ever seen that, slobber.
No, it doesn't
come
happen.
out of there.
Nope.
No.
Nope, they don't grow like that. They grow leaner, and they don't have that big, huge football round shape. Nope, they don't. They aren't like that here. And we aren't known for super big fish in Central PA either. They're here. There are a few here. But no, that's not what we're known for. And the top tier trout is, again, like upper teens usually on most of our...
Yeah. But boy, does the ones that, I tell people all the time, man, I don't know how long I fished. I mean, I fished Central PA for years without sticking a whiskey.
Oh, yeah.
But when you do...
You can go all year.
Man, you're the champion of the world.
That's right.
And they go through phases. Like, I think there was some... Like, in 2015, I swear to this day... There was something on trending, right? We had like 3 or 4 good summers of water and thermal, and the fish got there. I mean, they hit that 20-inch range more frequently than I had ever seen personally. So I think it can happen. It's just, to your point, it's a little less likely that it's happening on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And then the out of place ones you see on IG or whatever.
Yeah.
Back to the whole big fish thing. It's like, I just want to know what
Right.
was that legit or was it not? And I don't know if we can answer that. We can just hypothesize what we think and our opinions, but
that's very true. I think what's real neat about where you're living, like you said, you can isolate some areas and say, this fish is almost 100% wild. I mean, come on, even take the word almost out. That fish is 100% wild. I really don't even know of any places in PA where I can say that 100%. It's
Right.
different because
you have the potential for it, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. And
we all talk about that.
Yeah, and even the Fish Commission is doing better is stocking less over wild trout populations and whatnot. Things are getting better. Progress is often slow.
Sure.
Hey, so we've talked a lot about 20-inch fish.
Sure.
So I'll ask you this straight up. Do you think there are 30-inch wild trout out your way?
Do I think there's 30-inch?
Yeah, do you think
trout?
they exist anywhere without in Montana without a setup?
I can confidently say they do, and I say that because our FWP with Fish Wildlife Park does an incredible job at fish surveys.
Nice.
And they do it yearly. They are good at documenting pictures and lengths and weights.
Wow.
And the Big Hole River is a prime example of one of those streams that doesn't have any of that lake run influence. It's isolated. It's 185 miles long. And I want to say it was last year they shocked a 36-inch,
oh my God,
15-pound brown trout, man. And it's on the internet. I'm saying.
Oh my God.
Now, having said that, 185 miles of water.
Yeah.
They've been shocking it for whatever, tons of years. And occasionally the 30+ inch fish will show up in that watershed. Do I think they exist in other watersheds out here that are isolated? I do. I think there's a few. Have I seen one in person or have seen one caught by a buddy? I haven't. I want to say that may be the something that it's not in my skill set. Like maybe that requires some completely different tactic to catch those fish.
Do you need a big streamer to catch that trout, Matt?
No, I mean we've been talking about
right. No, right. I love that. I ask you that question. We talk about this a lot. You're right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's, we didn't get into approach. And I mean, boy, I feel like I owe you, I should name all my fish Dom because of, a pattern that you introduced me to, but
the unspoken pattern,
I just call it the Troutbitten special. And what you do with it is up to you, but I keep it close to my heart out here.
Yeah.
So, people ask, I mean, that's a good question I get, right? What do you do? What's your tactics? And I try to tell people, it's like, look, you want to ask me how I approach when I wake up and I'm sipping my coffee and I'm going after big fish. There's a process I follow and I fish and the fly got bigger since I moved out here, but I fish a big number 4 stonefly nymph. Yeah. And I have a tag dropper above that. We'll do, a caddis larva, mayfly imitation.
Okay.
And I cover a ton of water and I look at places that are unpressured. So I feel like unpressured areas, and I say unpressured and follow me here with this. Yeah. I think there's unpressured water. There's a couple different ways to look at it. Yeah. I look at the majority of people flowing down a very famous river and the main channel. And then there's this small deviation of a side channel that drift boats can't go through, right?
Okay.
And so to me, what is that channel? And how far does it go? Some of these channels out here, there's certain channels in PA, they might go a quarter mile. And then they loop back into the stream. What's back there? Because I know from the boat launch to the takeout is 15 miles. And I know most guys are covering that 15 miles in the main stem. So if I were to bomb it down to that side channel, get out, walk down to the bottom and fish back up, how many guys do that?
Right. Like 2 a year.
Maybe.
One of them's you. Yeah.
And I'm not kidding. I could cover quarter mile water and it's garbage. And then you get to this one bend that has a deep trough.
Yeah.
Boom. There's a whiskey.
You just know they're going to be, in that.
Yeah, I mean,
honey hole.
there's
Yeah.
a whiskey there, and it's like I attribute that to pressure, and I attribute,
Mm.
I mean, quality holding water or whatnot. But I'm approaching that, and I'm 95% confident
Hmm.
tight lining this number 4 stonefly
Yeah.
in the water will produce a strike from a predatory brown trout. I'm fairly confident. It's fishing, right? I may not get it.
Right. When we say predatory, you're thinking about the same ones that would chase a streamer if you were lucky.
To a certain degree. Yeah. So I think that, and this is just a Matt Grobe concept, I believe the ruckus that's created from this particular stonefly pattern with the bead I use, the tungsten bead I use, and the amount of lead I use is the right kerplunk to where it doesn't send fish running because it's not a natural kerplunk. It's that like the perfect ploop in the water that triggers a fish eat. And yes, you know the situation. You smash your streamer on the bank, and what happens? Before you get your line tight, you get a fish to eat.
A reaction strike sometimes, A
reaction strike. I feel like I can get that same reaction strike with a dead drifted stonefly on the initial kerplunk so it gives me this added advantage of getting that predatory strike, and then I dead drift it, and then let's say there's a log on that far bank, and I dead drift through the log, but I can't get close enough. I will use a crossover technique to where I'm jigging that stonefly through that log. So I feel like I cover that hole with a few different tactics without changing rigs, and I can move on to the next one.
So you will animate that stonefly.
Before I leave that hole, I will pulse, I will pulse those legs, and I feel like there are times where I will get a reaction from that. I will get a fish that comes out of that log area, and it will eat that. So what am I fishing? We've talked about it. Is that a juvenile crayfish? Is that a true stonefly nymph?
Right.
I think it's a great general pattern if you fish it with confidence and you apply different techniques. And look, I mean, that's all gathered experience from the forum and things we've talked about and things that have worked, and just kind of incorporated it into my game to where that's my approach for big fish, unpressured waters. And then I kind of use those techniques from a drift standpoint.
When you're pulsing it, how far, how many inches, how many feet?
So I'll rod tip. I don't strip it. I just bounce it with the rod tip a couple inches. And it's a particular area, right?
It's
like
not
I'm
overdone.
looking at, and it's against that log that I know I didn't get a good dead drift through. And like, I just know I didn't want to rip I didn't want to dead drift it because I didn't want to get stuck, or I could come up with a bunch of excuses we as fishermen use. And then I'm like, you know what? Before I leave, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to twitch this thing, and I'm going to get a pulse, and I'm going to see if I can get a reactionary strike.
Right.
And so I feel very confident doing that in that way on unpressured waters. And I'm not saying this can't work on the main stem, right?
Yeah.
But I've been able to target these fish effectively on foot because the side channel is smaller. Okay.
Yeah, I gotcha.
And so there's a time and a place for me to target big fish in the main channel with a streamer, but it's that main channel where what's the best way to approach it? You got a river that's massive.
Right, from a boat.
It makes a lot of sense to cover it with a streamer. So I believe people hook up quite frequently with big fish on a streamer, but it's more how they got that pattern in front of an eager fish more than the pattern itself, or more than the action. And I'm not the world's best streamer fisherman. I know I can see Bill Dell's probably texting me right now telling me to get off the air.
That's right.
But I just think in that scenario, that's the best way to approach fish is big river streamer. Makes a ton of sense to me.
Do they ever hit that tag fly up above? You said like a caddis nymph. Do they ever hit that? The big ones, do they ever hit that?
Yeah. The big
That's
ones.
why you have it there, right?
Right. I have it there, and I have caught, when I say big, the 20 to 22 inch fish.
Yep.
Recently, I've been fishing CDC soft tackles. I've
Okay.
really enjoyed those as the tag dropper, and I've caught, some substantial fish on a fly like that. And I'm at the end of the day, I'm a numbers guy, right? So when I'm fishing these side channels or whatever, I want to know what's in them.
Yeah.
And so I want a confidence pattern on my tag, and then a big point fly like that stonefly.
Right. So you're going big and small all at once.
Yeah, Dom, people will say I'm basically fishing a streamer. I mean, I don't even know if I want to. I mean, I don't know what constitutes that. In my mind, I'm fishing a big nymph, right? And
Yeah, but if it is a streamer, you're not moving it a whole lot. Yeah, that crossover
Right.
technique, as you said. Yeah.
What do you think? I mean, what would you constitute? That technique. I mean, would you say, well, you're just throwing a big number 4 streamer?
No, it's you're fishing a big nymph or a smaller streamer, or maybe even a medium-sized streamer. But the technique is, again, you're saying crossover. I talk about that. I write that. That to me is starting with sort of a nymphing presentation, and then sort of often then establishing that nymphing presentation and doing smaller, shorter animations on it with, like you said, those like 2, 3, 4, maybe 6-inch pulses, sort of at the most, trying not to move it too much. And you brought up Bill.
Right.
Bill always says, "Don't take it away from him. Don't take it away from him." And hey, we all acknowledge that trout are pretty efficient. You can call them lazy, but I think, whatever. They're very efficient. They don't really want to get up and chase your streamer or your fly 3, 4, 5 feet. Yes, they'll do it, but will they do it more often and more predictably if you're not taken away from them so much?
So, essentially that's one version of unpressured fish, okay? The second version of unpressured fish, and I feel like this applies to some waterways in PA, but a lot of waterways out here in Montana because of the size. So the majority of people hop in the drift boat and you're going. I mean, you're floating and sure you're back rowing, but you're getting like 1 or 2 shots at showcasing your pattern to these fish, okay? And some of these rivers, I mean, the Yellowstone River is not a hidden secret. Some of these holes on that river are massive. I mean, one riffle is, could be 35 yards wide and 75 yards long. And so how many times throughout the day is the fish at the back end or the middle of that hole getting an opportunity to eat a well-presented fly?
Right. Very few.
Very few, because how do you get the right depth to target that? Even if you're streamer fishing, there's various depths in there. And so I consider unpressured fish in that hole on a famous stretch of the Yellowstone River. But I take the opportunity to work it because you don't see many guys working a riffle like we may have worked a riffle back home. And so I work it and I have some sort of confidence. There's a particular stream we love to fish back there, and Pat and I, and you've floated it many times before, but there's one hole. Yeah. And I'll never forget this. Burke said he made an adjustment and set his bobber rig at like 20 feet. And I'm like, dude, you're never gonna get a strike at 20 feet.
Right.
Dude yanks out a whiskey. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I'm like, come on, dude. Like, that's
the
insane.
truth is, though, that never works. I've done that. That never works. You have no control or strike detection at that distance. But he did it.
Oh my gosh. But he did it. And so it taught me to open my, so like that hole in the Yellowstone that's 8 feet deep, that trout that's lethargic at the bottom of that 8-foot pool, to me is unpressured. And if given the opportunity, will eat a number 4 stonefly if given the chance. And so
that's cool.
It's just a different approach, man. I mean, that's kind of
that's cool because they're unpressured in the way that you're approaching them. They might see streamers all day, and they might see bobber rigs going down all day, but you're approaching them in a very different way. So in that way, they're
right because when you're doing the drift boat thing, you're not running an 8 feet of tippet underneath
because you don't want to stick all the time.
Right. The likelihood of a streamer presentation getting to that depth is slim to none, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. You can use your sinking lines, throw as much split shot and sinking lines as you like. You're not going to get that deep. All right. Hey, Matt, how about this one? Do you count fish?
You know how we A/B test stuff. Dude, I'm going to A/B test my numbers based on last year, and it's for my own personal need. Like I need it. I just need to do this for my own sake.
Honestly, it's because you fish that much that you go ahead and find another statistic that you want to keep track of. I mean,
sure.
I think that's what it is. People that sort of knock fish counting, I think maybe, first of all, haven't caught that many fish where it really matters. And then they don't fish often enough. Really, that's probably the key. That they're not fishing often enough to really be able to have that A compared to B data. That's really neat. You know, you're talking about from season to season, and you fish, you know, I don't know how many times.
I'm around 100, I think.
Yeah, right on. So that's a ton. And so you have that, you want to compare that data. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And you know what? Here's the other thing. So you have an actual fish counter. I did that for a while. But I think almost everybody kind of counts. You know if you caught 5 fish. And then a guy will be like, well, I might have caught around 10. Well, another guy, I think I caught 20 today on a real good day or something. A guy, I might have caught 30 fish today. So everybody's kind of counting out there. I think it's kind of silly to pretend that you're not, you know? Unless if you caught 3 fish, you know it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Everybody's kind of counting.
And
you care.
Sure,
everybody
you care.
cares. Yes.
How do you gauge? You're gauging your productivity. And I think on one of the podcasts, you guys went through and honestly said, how many fish do you catch in a day?
Right. And I thought that was an important thing.
I was tuned into it. Yeah. It was awesome.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, I don't know if you remember this, but back in the forum days, we had talked about, instead of the whole number thing, we were labeling success on a group of fish within the hour. And so if you were to get catch 7+ fish in an hour, it was great fishing. You didn't have to say, oh, I was catching 15 fish. No, it was, hey, Don, it was great today, bud. Yeah. And you know I was catching 7 fish per hour. If I'm out on the water for 8 hours, that's a 56 fish day. Like
right, and that's probably
that's a great day.
Right, but it's probably not going to sustain for 8 hours. But yeah, that catch rate, if you're more than a fish every 10 minutes, you're doing pretty damn good.
Oh, yeah.
And you'll have a lot of people go, well, I catch more than 10 an hour. Yeah, I get it. But all fishing kind of comes in patches, and we know that.
It does. And then you have days like, there's days I'm talking with Bill, and I'll bring up the old days up at when we first started, and we'd meet up there. Yeah, and we'd locate the honey hole where half the population was in there, and you whack 25 or 30 fish. Like it was. Pat had those places. Like I was amazed at how he had those locked in. I'm like, so you're strategically picking out each of these fish until you get that one whiskey, basically is what I felt like. Yeah. But you can rack up insane numbers in that. And I feel like out here, I showed Sloop one of these holes, and the guy won't leave it. I mean, you can sit in one spot and just whack them because they congregate in the deep water this time of year. More so, they did back in Pennsylvania, but out here, it's like out here they know like it would be incredibly odd to go through a winter without a major ice
event. Yeah.
And that's one of those other differences that you can still fish out here. You can fish out here all winter. You have to be hardy for sure. And there's only a handful, like I was telling Sloop this the other day. There's spots here where you have the luxury of a mile below a tailwater that it's never going to fluctuate. It's never going to get muddy. And it's just going to fish. And it doesn't matter how cold it gets. And then there's certain, like, believe it or not, on the Gallatin below Big Sky, there's humongous thermal features that springs that dump in that keep that river ice free all year long.
Right.
And
like
so,
us here,
yeah. I mean, it's like
spring water.
Spring water, and so there's places you can fish year round. Now the temperatures, there's bouts where the temperatures get too extreme to fish.
Well, tell me about that. What's the cutoff? Because I remember when you went out there, when you were getting ready to go out there, I said, I was glad for you had the opportunity. Because if you're not going to be here, then that's the only other place I'd want to be is where you are.
Sure.
And I remember saying, hey, what you're going to miss is winter fishing. And then I was seriously stunned when you were still fishing in the winter. So you're talking about what kind of temperatures, though?
I think this goes back to the humidity thing. That's a real thing.
Well, tell me about the humidity.
So there's no humidity. I mean, we're in an arid the dry West, right?
Okay.
It's an arid landscape, and they're just you've been out to Montana in the summer. It's
In the summer, yeah.
there's never rain,
Right.
and it's dry. Winter's no different. Now you get these snow systems that come in, but overall, if you have a sunny day, the air is so. I mean, your skin is cracking. Like it is so dry out here. The lack of water molecules in the air prevents ice buildup. I mean, and so if you're
In the guides.
a mono rig guy. And
right.
and you keep I think Dando was talking about it on the last podcast. You keep that arm up, right, in the elements, and you're mindful of
Don't strip.
that, and
Yep.
don't strip, short approach. I'd say 19 degrees and up. I'm confident I'm not going to have any mechanical issues with my rig. Mono rig allows you to fish through the winter. I mean,
Right.
seriously,
It's a big deal. I know. I know. It's a big deal.
I mean, it's amazing. I mean,
It is.
And if you fish fly line, you're going to have buildup. I mean,
Yes.
you are going to prevent yourself from being able to effectively fish with fly line out here in the winter,
Even in your dry climate.
even in the dry climate.
All
It's all about the mono rig, the less diameter on that, Maxima Chameleon, and it just doesn't accumulate as much.
You also, though, have, I mean, single digits and negative degree.
You can't fish in that.
I was going to ask. So you don't fish. What's your number?
I got beer drunk once. Okay.
Go ahead.
So I leave Bozeman with my buddy, one of my good fishing buddies. We leave about 6 a.m. We're all stoked to fish the lake section of the Madison. Real famous stretch of water. Blast on 191, past Big Sky through Yellowstone, drop down in there. It's like -30. I'm
Yeah.
like,
Oh my,
dude,
that's
what
you
were
can't
we
do
thinking?
it. You can't do it, right?
No.
Okay.
Nope. So we drive past the slide in.
Yeah.
Gallup's probably still snoring, and we get in to a pull off. Okay.
Yeah.
And we just start drinking beer, man. We're just BSing, and we start drinking beer. Well, 4 beers deep at 11 a.m.
Or were you waiting for it to get warmer?
Yeah, it was negative 22 at that point.
Right. Okay. It's warming up. It's warming up.
Negative 22. I get one shot, rig up, little buzz, catch a fish on my first cast right off the bank.
There you go.
Fly froze, real froze.
Yeah.
And we went home. You can't do it. So my cutoff, like I said, my cutoff's around 15 as a low if the temperature's going to
well, hell, bud. Then I'm tougher than you. I mean, I've fished single
Probably.
digits. Yeah. I never fished. I didn't have the opportunity to fish negative 22. That's ridiculous, though, that you caught one on. You had to be the only dude that caught one that day.
Dude, no one was there. I mean, it was one cast, one fish. We got back in, drank beer all the way to Ennis, and then, got back into Bozeman, and that was it. You couldn't fish. You can't fish effectively.
No. Because the water was flowing, but when the fly would hit the air, it would just immediately freeze.
No, yeah, it was a mess. I mean, it was a mess. So you need, in my opinion, 15 degrees out here. You can approach it, and then as it gets warmer throughout the day, you feel it. And I told you before, man, a 32-degree day in Montana when the sun's out is much warmer than a 32-degree day in Pittsburgh with the wind ripping. I'm just like, at first when I came out here, man, I was like, I thought these Montana folks were hardcore. Mm-hmm. And there's nobody out here. And I'm like, this is balmy, bro. I bought that. You remember that shovel head jacket? I told everybody on the forum to get. Dude, it's too hot for out here.
Really? Get on.
I'm telling you, a 32-degree sunny day in Montana is warmer than a day back in the Berg.
I'm surprised by all that. I really am. I mean, because, I remember even last year I fished like 10 or 12 degree weather a couple times. And it is rough. But I just kind of enjoy the battle. And I do it.
Yeah.
Like you say, you can deal with it. But no, I mean, I'm fine from, let's say, I'm fine anywhere from like 10 to 12 degrees and up,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and how many people out there are doing that? Not many.
Zero. Right.
I will say, I haven't been back home in 7 years or whatnot, but my short time here, the winters are trending somewhat warmer and they provide more of an opportunity for folks to fish, where my first couple years, and I told you, I joke with old Sloop, he was complaining about his feet the other day. I said, man, it's only December.
Yeah, you wait.
Sloop's, he's listening now. He got bigger boots, but I was like, if we get a normal winter out here, the pucker factor increases dramatically in January.
My buddy Jim made a good point today. I mean, it was about 26 or something when we started, and the wind was blowing. And he said on a walk-in, he said, there's a difference between being cold and just being cool. Just like there's a difference between being in pain and being uncomfortable,
Right.
And that's true. And something always kind of hurts in the winter. And you just learn to accept it. You go, well, I'm not going to be, my fingers hurt. Okay. Because they're cold and sometimes wet if you're catching fish. That's nice.
Right.
But they're not going to fall off. I'm not going to get frostbite here. I'm okay. The rest of my body's warm. And my fingers are pretty uncomfortable. So what?
Sure.
I'm fishing. And I think that's what it takes, is that ability to just go, I don't care. Because I'm not hurting myself, but it's uncomfortable. Whatever.
Right.
So, hey, seriously, you're out there in Montana now, and most anglers here in PA seem to think that by going to Montana, they have a better chance to catch a big fish or a trophy fish. Do you think that's true out in Montana versus PA?
Let's say we're talking trophy fish. We're back to the
right. We defined what was big. Let's say 20, but
20 inches.
What about 24? Let's go up to 24.
No.
Well, what about 20 then?
I would say 20. The sample size of this in my head, I'm saying that if you had a 7-day trip booked in the primary fishing locations in central Pennsylvania, and then you had a 7-day trip booked on the primary fishing locations in Montana, that the chances of landing a 20-inch fish would be higher in Montana than in Pennsylvania. Now, having said that, that's just that sample size, right? There's so many different things we could say of, are you exploring River B and all that stuff. So in that scenario, I would lean towards the answer is in Montana. And
well, do you catch bigger ones now more frequently than you used to when you were fishing the wild trout streams here in PA?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm catching them more frequently.
Yeah.
But I also know as an angler, I've grown. I mean, there's this massive Pennsylvania contingent that comes out here.
Yeah.
July and August that I've never, I remember driving down this dirt road. I was blue lining some ridiculous spot. And at the end of it, it was a PA plate. I'm like, of course there's a PA plate. It's that sportsman mindset that you gotta, there's a lot of hardy anglers coming out of Pennsylvania, just great anglers, just great all around. And you wonder why, what is it about our community of fishermen that boast these highly educated, highly motivated individuals? I mean, there's tons of them, right?
That's a good point.
I've seen some things coming out of Pennsylvania that, I don't want to say shocking, but there's some people out there that are yanking some real large fish in places that I probably wasn't looking at. I mean, can you say that? I mean, I've I'm curious.
No, I am too. Right. There's a faction of anglers here that fish a lot of small streams and catch some really big trout. And also I've fished a lot of small streams. Now, the truth is that when I'd fish small streams, I always think of small streams and dry flies. I've done that since I was really young. And so I don't target big fish. But it makes me want to, honestly, when I get a little bit of time back, when my kids are older and life possibly slows down for me, I'm going to try to do the same thing. One of the things,
when it's a big state.
Right. It's a big state.
I mean, it's a big state.
It sure is. And we have so many miles of trout streams. One of the things is, we addressed it earlier, you just kind of never know. There's so much stocking influence. There are a lot of clubs, and those clubs stock and feed those trout every day. And I told you about catching a trout the other day that was, I'm just sure it came from 4 miles below at that club. That's unfortunate. So it makes me question everything that I'm seeing.
Sure.
I would really love to see Pennsylvania move more and more toward stop stalking over wild trout. That's the main thing. And then I'd really love to see them crack down on the stalking over wild trout in clubs. Just because you own your Class A wild trout stream, it runs through your property, and let's say it's 30 feet wide, so it's not navigable. So here in PA, you can post it, and you can do whatever you want with it. But it's stream pollution, in my opinion, to put those stocked fish in there, because then I catch them 4 miles downstream.
Right. Yeah. I don't know, man. It's all fun. I love reminiscing and talking about this because I almost get angry about it.
I know. I think what most people will tell you is that it gets more complicated when you have, more people from different perspectives. You said about how there's more in Allegheny County than there is in all of the state of Montana.
Yeah, it was easier to do.
That's the excuse that they'll give you, is that, well, you get so many people they're trying to please. I get it. I'll say one more time. I think we're moving in the right direction. It's just pretty slow. Hey, I got one more question for you.
Yeah.
In episode 12 of the podcast, Austin brought up your tactic for windy days on a tight line, using a bugger or something similar. Yep. Tell us about that, because Austin and I both had kind of a different idea about it, but similar. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, you've been out here and these massive valleys with sometimes no trees. Yeah. The wind is prevalent. I mean, in certain times a year more than others, but on any given day in the summer, chances are, if you have the opportunity to fish in the afternoon, you're going to catch a breeze. Yeah. And so I got to the point where whatever was going on in my life, I fished when I could. And so there was a stretch of time where I had afternoons, and that was the only time I could fish. So I'm going to fish. Well, I get out there, and, everybody has their input on how to combat wind, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I know one of the more frequent used techniques is let's, weight the heck out of the rig.
Overweight the system. Yeah.
Overweight the system, get it in there and battle the wind. And I did that, and I never have the success. I don't know if that's more mental. I personally think it messes with your drift. Mm-hmm. I mean, you just have a bogus drift, or you're missing takes because you're not in contact with the sighter. Mm-hmm. And so at one point I was like, you know what, I'm going to, instead of combating it, right? That word tends to get tossed into the conversation when you hear the dreaded W. And instead of being combative, I'm like, I'm going to embrace it today.
I like it.
And I'm going to say, okay, well, what pattern would mimic, a jerky drift or weird drift that might entice strikes? And I said it before, I'm a very poor streamer fisherman overall. I try to work on it. I'm just not as well versed in that line of the game as I should be. Now, a standard woolly bugger, I have them in my box because certain waterways out here really produce well with the right size, medium-sized streamer, whether that's sculpins or leeches or whatever. These fish are tuned into it. Like it'll outfish a stonefly most times I've gone to these watersheds. And so I started putting, some of these in my box. And so that particular day, I was just casting upstream to do a typical dead drift, but obviously I wasn't getting a dead drift because the wind was so prevalent. Yeah. And it was jerking, it jerked my fly. And that marabou, what does that marabou do? It gives a little pulse. Right. And then I would try to get back into contact with that fly, but let the wind move it along the bottom or mid column, or just let it do whatever the hell it was doing. And my goal was to strip in the slack and try to stay in contact with that fly. Well, dude, I had a banner day. I'm like, I was whacking fish and I was letting it drag towards the end. And so there are days out here, right? And I think anything over 15 miles an hour, like sustained, where I'm just like, dude, I'm not having it. Like, this is just not working. And I'm not throwing a dry dropper rig. And I kind of think the most productive way to fish would be underneath the surface. I use that approach, and I've had a fair amount of success doing it out here the past few years.
Where's the weight?
Just a cone head. I mean,
the weight's in the bugger.
I'm a cone head. I tie my buggers really simple. I mean, and I have 3 variations. I mean, I have a black, an olive, and a white. And I always throw the black one on first. I have confidence in it, and a cone head with some 0.30 wraps of lead. Yeah, that's it. And get it to the bottom, and that's my jam on on that type of technique.
Get it to the bottom or close to it, and then let the wind just move it around.
Jerk, almost like a jig. You would pop a jig around, just like you jig it, jig. I do that with the bugger, and whatever. Like, I can't tell you enough how many times I've hooked up dragging that bugger on the bottom.
That's cool.
Or not me, the wind, and then I'm catching up to the slack, and boom. I mean, I'm hooking up.
I like it.
And I don't know. It's an interesting concept.
I like it. Makes sense. Hey, thanks, Matt. That was a great conversation, man. Good talking with you. Nice to catch up.
Yeah, man. It's been too long, brother.
You have any other words of wisdom, real quick. They have to be real quick nuggets of wisdom.
People are
Bleep that out. All right. So, hey, we'll do this again because we obviously left a lot on the table here, and we could probably talk for days.
for sure.
All right. Thanks to everyone out there for supporting the Troutbitten podcast, and I appreciate your kind words and enthusiasm for the project. Thanks again, Matt.
Thank you, Dom.
That's fun.
See you
dude.
on the river soon, hopefully.
Well, you got to get out here.
I know.
All right, I'll see you. So remember, troutbitten.com is a free resource for all anglers. So dig in and check it out. Navigate through the menus and find what you like. Share it, leave a comment, and use the search page if you're looking for something specific. Navigate by way of the categories and tags, too. Thank you for listening. Please give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and leave a comment, because that really helps. Until next time, friends, fish hard, enjoy the day, and find your life on the water.